Welcome, everyone, to this special interview edition of Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill Gross. Today's episode is our traditional post-major discussion with Steve Flink, U.S. Open 2022. I'm going to split this up into two parts. Part one is going to be very Carlos Alcaraz focused, the men's champion, getting into a little bit of his final with Casper Ruud, but also his run as a whole and what we might see from him moving forward 2023 and beyond, legacy stuff, etc. Part two is going to be much more focused on the field. Your Rafael Nadal, your Nick Kyrgios, your Daniil Medvedev, all the rest. Even I'm not sure where the Casper Ruud stuff is going to fall, part one or part two. We'll just have to see. But make sure you check out both. I will leave links to part one and part two in convenient locations for everybody. So without further ado, here is Steve Flink. We're joined once again by Hall of Fame tennis writer Steve Flink. His latest book, I almost said his greatest book, but it's a tie between that and his other. His latest book is Pete Sampras, Greatness Revisited. Also, the greatest tennis matches of all time. Check those out. For sure, it's our traditional post-major chat. U.S. Open 2022. Might split this up into two parts. Let's see what happens. Steve, thanks for coming on again. And it was great to see you in New York, I should say. We were able to watch some of these matches together from the media seating as well.
Yeah, it was great. I enjoyed that, Gil. And then hearing you do some of your reports for the U.S. Open radio from courtside was a pleasure. You did a great job.
Thank you. All right, Carlos Alcaraz is where we will start. I want to just dissect the run as a whole in terms of what the ingredients were that enabled him to take this next step in his career, to win his first major at 19 years old, youngest to win the U.S. Open since Pete Sampras did it, youngest to win a major since Nadal at Roland Garros in 2005, youngest number one in the history of the men's game. Did you think coming in that he was ready to do this, Steve?
I thought he might be. I mean, I was certainly had him among my top three. I thought coming in, if Rafa was healthy, that maybe Rafa, given all his experience, you had to make him the slight favorite. But I felt like he was really going to come down to either Rafa, Medvedev, or Alcaraz. I didn't see Kyrgios winning the tournament, although, he impressed me with how well he played before losing to Khachanov. So I did see him right up there. And then as it unfolded, I liked his chances more and more for a variety of reasons.
Yeah, you saw kind of Nadal, who we'll get to, immediately seeming like something was off. And the draw started to look good. That center match loomed large for a long time.
Yes.
And then it turned out to be the real turning point in his run, because he had to save a match point to get through that.
Absolutely. And the match itself will now take on larger prominence in historical minds because it led to the title. It would have been, you look at it, I certainly do. The quality was there. It was spectacularly high quality throughout the 5 sets. 5 hours and 15 minutes and saving a match point Alcaraz does in the fourth, and just the suspense, and it was so gripping. High quality rallies. But then the fact that he would go on from that quarterfinal to then, beat Tiafoe in the semis and win the title over Ruud was remarkable. And Sinner, and he need not be ashamed of his performance, because I don't think he's ever played better in victory or defeat.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, maybe when he took out Alcaraz at Wimbledon, but that was a spectacular match. And I think Sinner's profile and respect goes up after that. And Alcaraz goes from star to superstar ultimately. I
would just say, Bill, briefly, it's a good point. It was a very fine performance from Sinner at Wimbledon. I still felt that this was a higher quality match from beginning to end. Sinner served really well at Wimbledon, played well. So I take that into account, but I'd still pick this one. But this could be a nice budding rivalry. I mean, I think in the long run, you have to believe that Alcaraz will achieve more. But I think they could have some first-rate matches over the next decade, these two.
Historical question. I name dropped Sampras winning the U.S. Open in 1990 and Nadal winning Roland Garros in 2005. How does Alcaraz at this stage compare to Pete and Rafa in that respect?
It's a great question. I think that he's at a similar stage of development to Rafa in '05. You alluded to Rafa in '05, and he won the French that year, and he was 2 in the world that year, and he was on Roger's heels. He still had a lot of, the difference being that Rafa was not nearly as well-rounded as Alcaraz is right now. But in terms of his match playing ability and his kind of strategic acumen and know-how out on the court, I see a similarity. Pete might have been, although he won the Open, and it was a brilliant performance in winning the Open because he beat in succession, Lendl, McEnroe, and Agassi. I don't think he was as far along in his development. And that's why it took a couple more years. See, we didn't see that with Rafa, obviously. Rafa came back and won the French the next year and just kept going. Pete had a couple of years where he played very well, particularly in '92, but he didn't win another major until the '93 Wimbledon. And I think there was a reason for that. But Alcaraz, to me, is incredibly well-rounded at this stage. You watch the way he plays now, the options he gives himself, how he comes forward, Gill, and he'll hit a great, you see it time and again, those delayed approach shots where he hits a cross-court backhand and says, wait a minute, I'm coming in. It's a good enough shot, I'm coming in. He's less hesitant to do that than any of the other top players now. And obviously just great from the backcourt, sound volleyer, very good serve that I think is going to get much, much better. And that's one of the things I noticed at the Open. We can get to it in more detail, but that at the fourth set of the final, he finally decided, no, this is not the set for serving and volleying. This is not the set for spot serving. This is this, I'm going to let loose. And he served half of his aces, 7 of the 14 in the fourth set. And I felt like, wow, that I'd like to see more of this from him. But I would say those comparisons are always difficult to make. And we saw what Pete went on to do, what Rafa went on to do. But I believe that Alcaraz, who will get a lot better, is already remarkably versatile, incredibly versatile.
It's almost the net play jumped out. There's no doubt about that. The way he was coming forward and attacking the delayed net approaches, Steve, was one of the things I focused on in my breakdown of the match on Monday. But there's almost a good debate to be had about what was most impressive about what Carlos Alcaraz did here against Ruud. And, you could also zoom out and look at the run as a whole. The technical skills, that's one thing. The physicality, no one has spent more time on court since this has been recorded in terms of Grand Slam run than Carlos Alcaraz. He passed Kevin Anderson, what Anderson did at Wimbledon in 2018. And then there's the mental side, where so often we see players who are trying to, who have never been there, basically, let their nerves get in the way, and that didn't happen. So you have the three kind of pillars here: physical, mental, technical, and it's almost hard to pick which one stands out because all of them were so good.
It's very true. All of that is true. I mean, I would only add, the only thing I can add to what you're saying is I don't think he's even near his potential yet. And that's one of the reasons why we saw so many matches, you spent so much time on court, is some sets got away. You take the Sinner match, for example. He's won the first set. He's got 5 set points in the second set. And one of them, the fourth set point, the court was wide open. He had hit a topspin lob over Sinner's head, and Sinner hit a kind of a weak backhand overhead, started retreating. The point was as good as gone, but Carlos made a mistake and off the forehand and eventually lost that set, served for the third set, didn't win that one, and had to come back from match point down in the fourth. So I look at all these matches. The Tiafoe match, it looked like he had Tiafoe beaten cold early in the fourth set. He had been on such a surge from the middle of the second to early in the fourth, blitzing through Francis, who looked like his legs were gone. And then from 2-love, up a break at 2-love, gets another break to go up 3-1 in the fourth, and it didn't happen. He had a match point later in the set. He lost that set. What I'm saying is there are still times like that where he looks as if there's room for growth. Where I feel like he could still get better, and all of the shots will only get better and stronger, particularly the serve, because if he can get in that range as he already does between 126 and 135, and we know he can do it, that'll start happening more consistently. It'd be easier for him to produce the bigger serves and rely more on bigger first serves. I just feel like wherever he is right now, he hasn't begun to really tap that. And I think that has to be very reassuring, Gil, to both himself and his coach, Juan Carlos Ferrero, to know that some people are saying that there's just a little bit of maybe Carlos mania out there because Djokovic was not here and Rafa wasn't playing well. And okay, you can look at all these other factors, but he had to beat a lot of really good players there down the stretch, particularly the wins over Sinner and Ruud, and also an inspired Tiafoe. I just feel like his game is well suited to compete against anybody, any style. And I do believe that it could be a fascinating rivalry over the next couple of years between him and Djokovic. And I just feel like this kid he's got a good head on his shoulders, and that he's going to get a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get into the Ruud final specifically, so are you saying one of the areas that you see for improvement is his ability to just perform under pressure on big points, be opportune, take his break chances, and win the big points?
Yes, he didn't have a great success rate on break points. Break points converted in the tournament that could have improved, and obviously he could have spared himself had he won those at least the second or third set against Sinner, and had he closed out Tiafoe. And so there was a certain pattern there, but I think that he'll move beyond that pretty quickly. And I just think and that's the match playing side of things. Then in terms of the technical side, I think inevitably that will improve. I don't see why not. Also, we have to take into account, Gil, looking at this tournament, that he'd been in for Carlos something of a slump after winning Madrid. He lost in the quarters to Zverev at the French, then Sinner got him at Wimbledon, and he had a couple of finals over the summer. You thought he might win at least one of those on the clay. He did not. Tommy Paul beat him on the hard courts, and then Cameron Norrie also beat him on the hard courts. So he didn't have a great run leading up to New York. I think it may have just robbed him of just a little bit of his confidence. But boy, it will be back now in abundance after coming through in New York.
I do think it helped him make an adjustment because it was a lot, the breakpoint conversions that were really coming back to haunt him in some of the matches that he was losing. Wimbledon being 0 for 9 against Sinner and beyond. He's been in every single match. He hasn't lost in straight sets. And him and Juan Carlos Ferrero both said, he was trying to take some pressure off and just enjoy his tennis a little bit more in this event. So I think looking back, struggling may have been, they say like you win or you learn. And I think he learned from those losses in hindsight.
He did. Yeah. Oh, I absolutely agree. But I think in turn, he had been on such a roll from Miami, winning Miami on the hard courts, Madrid. He was so good on both the hard courts and the clay that many thought he might win the French, which didn't happen. And then it sort of, I don't want to say it spiraled, but it definitely, he was hurting coming into Wimbledon, didn't have good preparation, lost there to Sinner, and didn't play his best, and Sinner was terrific. And then you could see the strain over the summer, what you're alluding to with Juan Carlos in those finals. You could see he was not enjoying himself. It carried over onto the hard courts as well in his losses leading up to Flushing Meadows. But I just think he definitely learned from those, and it definitely wasn't going to dent his morale deeply. There's too much deep inner conviction. And he even was saying in this press conference after the final, he thought after at Miami, winning Miami, at that time is when he began to think, I can win a Grand Slam tournament. He was very honest about that. That you didn't expect to necessarily hear that, and he proved it. And I just feel like he'll have a decent fall. I still expect him to end the year number one, to hold on to that, because I think his results will be strong enough to keep him there. So then he'll go into Australia and as the top seed, which is amazing. And I don't see why he doesn't have a very big year next year. Why? I mean, I would certainly expect one more major, maybe two, because I just think he's that good. And the other thing, Gil, I'm curious to get your feelings. I just feel like he's going to, not to minimize, not to diminish the greatness of the likes of a Medvedev, who's already won a major, a Zverev, who was an eyelash away from winning the 2020 Open, and Tsitsipas, if he can somehow overcome what must be a damaged psyche right now. But I look at all of these guys and even a re-emerging Dominic Thiem, and I just don't think in the long haul, and maybe not even in the short haul, that they can stay, that they're consistently going to be able to stay with him. Not that he never loses to them, but I think all told, he's just a better player than anybody in that gang. Being 19 and the other guys being in their mid-20s, and he's just going to surpass them, to me, by a significant margin.
I agree. I think it's a different level. Carlos, to me, all-timer, those guys, greats of their time, greats of their period, right? I don't know how you kind of sort that, but I sometimes think about it as tiers, and I see Alcaraz as historically tier one in all likelihood, and those players, that group, not being in that same tier one.
Absolutely. And I feel as if, yes, and maybe Medvedev can end his career with four or five majors. Maybe Zverev gets three. And maybe Tsitsipas finally gets on the board. But in Carlos, we're looking, to me, at double digits for sure, and quite possibly high double digits, and quite possibly even threatening the three icons we talk about so often these days, in Djokovic and Nadal and Federer. I'm not saying he'll surpass them, but he's young enough that if he starts picking up these majors in clusters, say from 21, 22 on, that there's no reason he can't go well into his 30s, and the ambition will be there, and the talent is there, and the talent he will only improve. So I can't see him ending his career, as I sit here now, with anything less than 15 majors.
Yeah, can't disagree. I mean, it's super early, and I guess we don't even know who his rivals are going to be, because likely, down the road, we've never heard of whoever those players are going to be. But I really do think he's on that level. I'm with you. So the Ruud final, good quality. I think both players brought it. What was your biggest takeaway? How well Carlos Alcaraz played at the net, and especially late in the third set, when the match was at its pivot point, and in that 5-6 game in particular, he came forward and made some very, very important plays up there,
including on both set points against him. So you're so right about that. Yeah, that stood out to me for sure, because I thought what happened was that he had the one break in the first set, didn't lose his own serve. They each had their chances, but he took his and was a very worthy first set winner. And then from 2-2 in the second, I thought Ruud played really well, and Carlos was not opportunistic. He had a break point on Ruud serve. There was this succession of games, break point on Ruud serve, and 30-love on his own serve, and another chance to break Ruud in the next game. So it was a very misleading 6-2 scoreline to me. And then he goes up the break early in the third, 2-love, and he's got a break point for 3-love. And Ruud, to his great credit, as he so often did in that portion of the match, he served his way out of trouble very well. He hit some great first serves, beautifully located on break points against him. So if Carlos could have gotten that second break to go up 3-love in the third, I think life could have been a lot easier. But then Ruud really pressed him hard, and it all came down to that game you mentioned, 5-6. All those deuces, I think 5 deuces, and a couple of 2 set points against Carlos, and he attacked on both. And one of them made a beautiful forehand on the stretch, made that forehand drop volley, because Ruud hit the passing shot down the line and he really made him stretch. It was not a bad pass, and it was reasonably low, and Carlos made the drop volley cleanly. So Yes, and then a perfect tiebreak. Kept looping his returns. He kind of surprised Ruud, I thought, with the trajectory of those returns, and that paid off. And so after Ruud served an ace on the first point, Carlos ran off 7 points in a row. And then, as we were talking about earlier, then a great serving set from Alcaraz to close it out in the fourth and got the one break he needed. So it was impressive. And I all credit to Ruud, because many people were predicting a straight set win for Carlos coming in, including Patrick McEnroe. And the case was there to be made that he could possibly do it in straight. But Ruud gave a very good account of himself. I just think he's obviously far more limited than Carlos, and Carlos made him pay a price for standing so far back on the return to serve positioning near the fence. And he had just too many options, too much versatility, the firepower from the back, the ability to come forward. In the end, you felt like the match was in his hands. Even when it was starting to slip away, you felt like if he just lifted his level slightly, which he surely did, that was going to be enough. And what a worthy champion he is.
Yeah, I see it exactly the same way. All four sets, in fact. I'm really with you on all of it. I don't think Ruud has a return strategy against Alcaraz that works.
Yeah.
He stands up and he chips, and Alcaraz attacks that block return so brilliantly. Then he moves back, and Alcaraz will serve and volley and take advantage of that court position, as you alluded to.
Yeah.
I mean, it just, and then you look at this, the third set tiebreak, and it's just, they played one rally in the entire breaker, because Alcaraz is serving and returning so much better that he's winning these points quickly. He's in advantaged positions right away. So I think the next step for Ruud is mostly on the return of serve on a quick court, where he needs to figure out a way to drive returns from closer to the baseline. Or if he's able to beef up the backhand enough where he can hit it from the back fence and just get more depth on it and, pass a serve and volleyer.
Yeah.
I think that's the obstacle for Ruud if he wants to win a match like this.
Yeah, good point. I mean, the phrase "a la Medvedev" came to my mind, in the sense that he's always his strength. He also stands so far back, but of course he makes very, very deep returns down the middle and takes the initiative away from the server very, very quickly that way. Ruud is going to have to learn to do that. I don't know how adept he's going to be, Gill, in the long run at driving those returns. I think it's always going to be an issue. And his backhand is always going to be an issue, although I must say, I think his backhand now, compared to what we saw from him in the spring, is significantly better.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, It's so quick how different and improved that shot is in such a short period of time.
Definitely. And that's one of the things that kept him in the match for a while, because obviously Carlos was going to try to attack that side and did a good job. But Ruud, the combination of the effective slices, and then the two-hand, the drives when he had the time, keeping good depth on those. He wasn't making that many backhand errors. I mean, Carlos really had to coax those errors. He had to force them. So it was a pretty high quality final, I thought.
Yeah, I agree. And Ruud also, if anyone was going to play a nervous match, I thought it might have been Casper, and he didn't. So he deserves a lot of credit for that as well. Big picture with Ruud, he makes 2 major finals in 2022. I was not expecting that. Full credit to him. I didn't think he'd get to number 2 in the rankings either, and he's done that as well. So really, really great accomplishments, and he's just 23. For some reason with him, I still have a percentage of skepticism that he is in the elite ranks with Nadal and Djokovic and Alcaraz, Medvedev on hard, Tsitsipas on clay. Although you can make some great arguments for Ruud on clay, I still have a small skepticism there, not fully, but a little bit. And I don't know if it's just because I don't see the big wins. Like, he's 3-7 against top 10 players this year, and I'm just not seeing the wins against the players who I just mentioned. Do you share that feeling?
Totally. Totally. I mean, just go back in your mind's eye. I mean, he was taken apart by Rafa in the French final. Would it have been different if it was a semi or quarter and he wasn't quite as nervous? Maybe slightly. I don't think a great deal. Think of what Djokovic did to him in Rome. Djokovic really gave him a clinic in many ways, took him apart. And so, yes, I think he has a, when he's up against the very, very best, and he's done well against, played a good match against Carlos in Miami, played a good match here at the Open, but it's still hard to see him not being outclassed. And then again, the other issue with him is that we know he can lose to a, there are people that can pick him off that would, that it's never going to be an easy path for him in the earlier rounds the way it is for the other top players. At least I don't think it will be. But that doesn't take away from, as you said, anybody would have projected that he's going to be in two finals, particularly in the U.S. Open final. Not many people would have gone along with that scenario. So, and I think he's a great professional, great credit to his trade. And the fact that he has gone to work and improved the backhand so markedly over in this span of time is encouraging. But yes, I share your concerns as well about what happens to him when he comes up against the elite in his profession.
Yep. Got to keep getting better, which he has. The improvements have been very visible with even the serve and the fitness, his confidence in big matches. So he's got to keep making those improvements, because I guess we both agree that he's actually not there yet, even though his ranking suggests that he is there already.
Yeah, no, let's face it. Of course, the draw opened up in each case, and I mean, we shouldn't have, and in Paris, we shouldn't have had Djokovic and Nadal playing a quarter. Things could have been different there, and in New York, he had a fairly favorable draw in New York. It might have been tougher for him to beat Kyrgios than it was to beat Khachanov in the semis, but all power to him. He got the job done. He escaped against Tommy Paul, so he's to be commended. There's no doubt about it. And again, I think his serve is improving too, which will need to continue to be the case. But I'm encouraged by what I've seen. The sort of the higher quality, more pace, better location on his first serve now, which again got him out of trouble often against Carlos and also in many other matches as well. So there's some positive signs and there's some lingering concerns.
Yeah. One more question on the final that I got to ask. Do you feel like Alcaraz's legs were finally heavy in that final?
For a while. What impresses me is the way I felt that started to kind of creep in toward the end of the second and it stages in the third after the break got away from him in the third and he had to battle so hard. But then once we got to the tail end of that set and the 5-6 game that you and I both appreciated so much through the tiebreaker right through the fourth, I thought that much of that disappeared. They're understandable that would surface for a while because of everything he'd been through. And obviously it didn't help him. We didn't talk much about it, but it looked like he had Tiafoe beaten soundly. He's lost the first set tiebreak. Again, that was one of those sets he could have won. 6-3 down in the tiebreak. He gets back to 6-all and then pulls a backhand wide unforced and double fault, second double fault of the breaker. So he kind of helped Francis out a bit on some of the big points in that opening set to go behind, then took over the match and was really in utter control there from the middle of the second till early in the fourth. And that's when he, didn't really pounce the way he needed to at 2-love and 3-1 in the fourth. And then in a match point eluded him later at 5-4, and the tiebreak got away from him from 5-4, and he's in a 5-setter. So all of that wear and tear, all of that toil, it wasn't easy, and these were very physical matches. And then again, this gets back to the serve again, Gil. I keep thinking about it. Suppose he had served bigger and a little better in some of these matches. What was great about the 4-set was the number of free points he was getting, aces or service winners. And the last game of the match is a perfect example of the final, where he goes to 30-love and he has one of the easiest overheads he could ever see, and he hits it in the net. Maybe it was a little tight, comes back with an ace, misses an easy forehand at 40-15, but then comes back with a service winner. So the serve really was able to it was the reassuring factor for him in a match serving game where he wants to close this out so badly that he was able to get those free points, those quick points, because undoubtedly his mind was on the title a little bit. So I look back on all of that and say, what would be different if Carlos, could rely more on a bigger serve and get more free points, which he's fully capable of doing, particularly on the hard courts. I think it can make a big difference, and I hope that's the emphasis for him and Ferrero going forward, because that made it difficult for him at the Open.
Agreed. And he lost every single tiebreak until that third set tiebreak in the final.
Right.
Like every single time there was a set that was up in the air, it never went his way. And it goes back to, it almost gets lumped into the breakpoint conversion topic, where you do feel like sometimes he's coming up short in these 50-50 pressure moments, and it's just making it harder, although he so often prevails because of his talents and the fact that he can outplay someone so thoroughly when needed. So yeah, I agree with you about the offseason, and I do think they'll focus on the serve. They need to focus on something because he can't get any bigger and stronger. They say that he's at the weight that they want him to play at for the rest of his career. So it's not going to be an offseason full of this, fitness transformation like we saw last year.
I would just say this, Gil. I do think he can actually get stronger, though. I agree. I think they're right about the weight, but I think inevitably when you go from your late teens to your early to mid 20s, you will get stronger in some respects, but they don't want him to lose his speed, because we didn't even talk about that. There's nobody faster in the game. Yep. And that was once again showcased in New York, because the court coverage is at times just astounding. And it really paid off for him. And I also think we shouldn't ignore his defense, because a lot of time, he makes great running forehands, astounding running forehands. But then there were times against Tiafoe where I thought he defended beautifully and just went to the slice and worked his way back into the point. He's an incredibly mature player that way, and that's why he has such a wide range of options. And I would think he must, with all due respect to Juan Carlos Ferrero, he's got to be one of the easiest guys to coach in that sense, is that they know how good he is and they just want to harness it all, and they will.
That is it for part 1 of my discussion with Steve Flink. Make sure you tune in to part 2. Link is right here, where we will discuss everything outside of your Carlos Alcaraz and Casper Ruud storylines when it comes to the 2022 U.S. Open Men's Championships.